thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. It is, because you all met me at the films, I won't take much time, but I just want to start just briefly saying how much I appreciate CHSA. CHSA was actually just absolutely instrumental in the creation of the book, in fact, in everything, because I don't know how many you were on it, but back in 2020, when I started the process with the thesis and thinking about the subject, this was the middle of COVID, and so we were all online, and I was able to do a presentation to this group. I don't know how many of you were, we had this presentation in 2020, and I kind of outlined the initial kind of thoughts about the Chinese Napa Valley, and I was worried, actually, that how would a non-Chinese person be viewed trying to tell this story? This story is so important. And the group, you were so welcoming and encouraging, and that's where I met Joyce Chan, who has been such a an enthusiastic supporter, and Connie, and so many others. And so I just want to thank CHSA. This book and the movie would not be here without you guys kind of keeping it alive. So I just want to thank you very much for that.
Well, John, I'm just thrilled to have seen the movie for the first time after seeing a short draft, and I'm just thrilled because so much history is in there. It's portrayed so clearly, and it's very relevant for today. So, yes.
I'm Jeff Hamilton. I have the honor of being the director and producer of the piece, and I often get asked what was the hardest part of doing it. And I think I started to panic after we had filmed Connie's part and as well as Jack's part. There was so much good material. I literally have 3 hours of video that I had to get down to an hour. So that was tough because the stories were so wonderful and interesting.
So one question to start us off, and just to let the audience know the way this will work. We'll talk up here for maybe about 15, 20 minutes or so, but then we will have a chance for audience Q&A. So if you guys have questions, please think about them. There will be a chance for you all to ask questions of our 3 panelists. So what I wanted to start out with was just the question of why make a film? You have a book already that would seem to be able to tell the story pretty well. Well, what does the film add that maybe the medium of text didn't?
Great. Let me start, and then let me do just a brief history of how we got the film, and then I think Jeff can talk about what it meant to bring the book together. 2 years ago, I think a year and a half ago, there was a Chinese New Year's celebration going on in Napa. And I'm a board member of the Napa County Historical Society, and we had a table there. And in fact, the last few images we saw of the dragons in the video, that was actually from that event. And I was there with the archivist from the Napa County Historical Society. We had the books there. We sold 1 or 2. We talked to a few people, but it felt like kind of normal, whatever. And but it was a great celebration in Napa. The next day, the Napa County Historical Society got an anonymous donation of $10,000 with the goal of, and the only direction was, the point was to evangelize and spread the word on the history of the Chinese Napa Valley. And we have the book. I was like, what else can we do? And Caitlin Scott Moxon, who was invited, she's the executive director. Unfortunately, she was invited here. She couldn't make it. She said, I know this guy that I worked with before that is a great filmmaker. And she wasn't sure if he had done a documentary before, but maybe we could do it as a film, as a way to kind of spread the word. And so I'll briefly turn over to Jeff, but that was the impetus for why do we even, because it was not part of the thing. I think Connie, we were historians. She's a real historian, an aspiring one. Books are the language we use. But movie, I think it really does. Jeff made it, translated this kind of the book into the moving kind of picture in such a way. That's how people think right now. So anyway, Jeff.
Yeah, I had done some work for Caitlin through another museum in Vacaville, and this is my second career. I'd never made a documentary before. I was a Silicon Valley engineer for most of my life, and I retired and started doing videography stuff, and she said, would you like to do a documentary? I said, well, yeah. So this was kind of a neat bucket list thing. And then I heard the story, I read John's book, and then listening to Connie and Jack and all the background just became kind of like this passion project. So it became very emotional from that standpoint, because it's just such an interesting story. And I think the next challenge that we've got is we're very happy with how this came out, but it's alluded to in the documentary is to get it to the 4th grade California education level and getting it shortened so that it meets the curriculum for California history. And so, I thought I was panicked with 3 hours of video, getting it down to less than an hour. Now we're going to try to get it down to 20 minutes. So that's the next challenge. So fortunately, my son is a 4th grade school teacher and loves movies and everything. So he's going to help me get it down to what's appropriate for the 4th grade curriculum.
Well, I just think that the biggest challenge that faced the filmmakers in their story telling is the fact that we don't have any evidence of the Chinatowns in Napa Valley. Whereas in other Chinatowns, there's archaeology, there's a tradition of oral history, there are museums that have this exhibited. So this is a remarkable achievement to have done the documentary with the visual of the Napa Valley and how some of the documentation, of course, and not using the newspapers of the time, which had the most racist stories about the Chinese. It was just impossible. But and then the wonderful oral histories that you got from the descendants, the Chan family, the Zhu family. I mean, I was mesmerized listening to the story of Dr. Zhu, talking about his great grandfather coming on the ship and the rice, from his mother. I mean, that's so vivid. It's got to be true. You can't make this stuff up.
That's right. In fact, just briefly, I came across Dr. Zhu. He had done, obviously back when they called blogs, when I was doing my initial research, it's like, couldn't find anything. And he and his aunt had decided to put together a family blog, which they didn't call them blogs anymore. And it was just I was just reading this, and it was just all this great information just in this bunch of web pages that probably nobody was looking at. And I was just mesmerized. And he's been so gracious, and he is just an amazing storyteller. He's joined us in a couple of these screenings, and I think Jeff would probably, we had probably, I don't know how much tape we had with him. You could almost listen to him for 45 minutes, and you would just be immensely entertained. He's a terrific person. A pediatrician, retired pediatrician from Sacramento area, and just a phenomenal human being.
So that kind of builds into one of my other questions here. Talk a little bit more about the sourcing for the film. And we see and the book as well, right? In research, we see the oral histories, their newspapers. What other ways did you go about sourcing the information for the book and then the film?
That's fair, and it's actually, you kind of saw it. It's as Connie mentioned. One of the primary sources we have practically no, or almost no, direct written kind of evidence from the Chinese who lived in the Napa Valley. They were not, and this is where Connie, I also have to mention, she did write the foreword, which is an excellent piece of writing, but she also was instrumental in reviewing the drafts as I did them. And in my Harvard education, talking about, we were taught, all the Chinese were illiterate when they came over, and that's not true, right? The Chinese, some were illiterate, as we heard. Jeff Du's grandfather was, or great grandfather, but not all were. But we did not have just the writings from them. The diary entries, whatever we might have, we just don't have, and they would just not represent even in the newspapers. And newspapers, they were horrible, but also invaluable because there were these daily things, and that's what people used for entertainment, and they were incredibly racist. But you can kind of pivot through it a little bit and see the currency that was going on, but they were just depicted in such horrible ways, and so we had to do a lot of triangulation. So it's a lot of looking at, the vineyard owners getting interviewed about the Chinese. Okay, we kind of learned something there, and that was in the newspaper, and they decided not to, censor that, luckily. So we kind of had to do a lot of, and within Connie's work was really instrumental, I think, helping kind of craft the cultural, what a small town Chinatown was like. And so we had to use some extrapolation of how it was in other areas, and then coupled with just a few pieces of what we have from the oral histories to kind of pull it together. But it was definitely challenging, probably one of the reasons why it hadn't really been published before. And so it kind of left a little bit of an opening for us to kind of fill.
Well, I have to mention, the altar for the temple is here.
Here, somewhere.
The temple that was in Napa. and it's a Taoist temple, and it has the two columns of writing, beautiful, beautiful poetry that shows the Chinese were literate in their culture, and the fact that they embrace these words. And so the altar is here, and it had been on display for a while, but it was donated by the Shuk family, so the Chan. Okay,
So one of historically speaking, one of the things I found interesting is that in telling the story, you mentioned that St. Helena's Chinatown was kind of like there was eventually like a noticeable Chinatown. Calistoga also eventually had a noticeable Chinatown, but in Napa, it said that the Chinese were you said that the Chinese were kind of spread out throughout the town. What led to that? Why was the kind of like the geographical kind of like layout of Napa different from these other Chinatowns?
Right, it's a good point. It's kind of true even today. If you were to go Napa Valley, Napa, St. Helena, Chinatown, Calistoga, I mean, St. Helena and Calistoga are primarily agricultural towns. Now, tourism, of course, is everywhere, but I mean, effectively it's agriculture, whereas Napa had a much more diversified economy. And so what you had is, you had the Chinese kind of spread throughout, and I think as much as it can be said, Napa was probably more cosmopolitan, and so they didn't, having Chinese living among them, they were just everywhere. They were just I mentioned they lived in the homes as domestic servants, but you can actually see there were little apartment buildings that had Chinese living in them. And so I think they were just, because they were spread out across many different industries, it wasn't quite as threatening. But in St. Helena, in Calistoga, it was, I think, 100% agriculture. And then you had the Chinese coming in who were paid less. It was $1 a day during the 1880s, 1890s, $1 a day for a Chinese worker, $1.50 a day for a white worker, and you also had room and board. And so the white working class, I think, just felt threatened, even though there were not nearly enough of them to do the work. I mean, this was, again, it's the same as today. It's they were threatened, but it was based on a complete fallacy that there was enough white workers. There's this kind of a trope that I read in several different places. You had a white vineyard worker come in, and as soon as they heard about a gold strike or silver strike in the Sierra Nevadas, they would throw their hoe on the ground and run up to try to strike it rich. The Chinese, though, when they kind of agreed to work, they did, and they fulfilled their contracts. And you can imagine for the vineyard owner, that was worth so much, right? Because you can actually count on them to do it, and they didn't get drunk, and they were just a great workforce. So I think it was just really, the economic conditions drove really the intense. St. Helena was raised the heart of anti-Chinese sentiment in the Napa Valley because of the focus on the economic side of it.
Well, I thought that you saw a picture of the Chan family during Chinese New Year, the children in their beautiful costumes in front of a temple. And later these children some of them, they moved away, the whole family moved away because the father said there's no future for education for the children here. They couldn't go to the schools, they were denied their culture, they were ostracized. So you could see why the Chinese did not keep their families here, even though they did have families. There was no future for them. But they survived, and we hope that they will find more descendants here. I think that there's a descendant of the Chan family, there.
David?
Oh. Yeah. Sorry.
All right, Doris.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I'm assuming that most of the labor force itself, the Chinese labor force itself, were migrant laborers. How far did they travel? If you were a migrant Chinese laborer in the Napa Valley, were you sticking to the Napa Valley? Were you moving from the Napa Valley into the central? Like, how far away did the kind of the migratory part of the Chinese migrant community move?
Perfect. I'm back.
Oh, I just wanted to add, it's Daniel Kwan, an architect who's done so much work with Angel Island and everything. He just informed me that his family's from Napa, and he's going to be doing more research and trying to find his roots. There's Daniel Kwan there. So we hope that there will be other descendants who will provide more oral history for the future.
Yeah. No, and I think Jack laid it out properly, at least as we understand the migratory. I mean, the Chinese Six Companies was the organization that really placed the different groups, and so I think it was a fairly transient at least in the agricultural side, a fairly transient workforce. We see the China store owners, they would stay, you know, they are, I mean, Chanhua Jack, whose picture was there, you know, he was called in the newspaper the mayor of Chinatown. You know, he was kind of the representative, and so he had longevity. But I think the laboring force, just especially back then, you know, the economic kind of everything ebbed and flowed as far as the success of the crops, the seasonality of the crops, and what they were doing. So there was a lot, I think, a lot more going back and forth on the agricultural side. The domestic side would have been much more permanent, right? Because you always need domestic servants, you always need the laundromats and so on. So I think it probably varied on the kind of work that was doing. But the Chinese six companies were really instrumental, I think, in helping kind of facilitate that.
The Chinese had an incredible network. The Chinese six companies were the ones that organized civil disobedience during the passage of the Geary Act, which required all Chinese to register, men, women, and children. And the Chinese six companies said, resist, do not register. And this was a famous court case that went to the Supreme Court, which Fong Yucheng versus U.S., in which the Chinese lost, and they had to register. However, there was that organization, the network. Chinese did not act alone. Every Chinese worker was connected to a family, a clan, and a larger organization. So they really had a sense of community, despite of all the hardships and the discrimination. They felt that there was help, that they could resist if they worked together.
So we're going to go ahead and transition now to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll bring the mic out to you.
We have a
Mic, okay, we'll do we don't need to do the mic revolve.
So the existence of the photographs is really essential, right, to telling the story to prove what was there. So who took the photographs? Was it journalists? Were it the owners of the land?
You know, we don't know a lot of photographs. Things that I was able to research, you know, in the archives, and say the Napa Historical Society had them, and they made some collections. Where they came from, I don't know. And I mean, I think at the moment that might be all the photographs there are of the Napa Valley Chinese. I thought I scoured pretty much everything, and then Jeff found a few more. But that's kind of it. I mean, that is. So I think it's remarkable we have photographs. It's so frustrating. We don't have a photograph of Calistoga's Chinatown. I don't have a photograph of Napa's Chinatown. You know, I have that. So we have a sketch. We had that one picture in front of the altar, and that's it. And we had that one picture of St. Lena's Chinatown. And there was photographers everywhere, and the fact they didn't deem it important enough to take pictures there is heartbreaking. My hope is that there's some maybe in one of our 7,000 square foot, you know, storage area here, there's photographs that we can get to, because yeah, I think it's just like, I wish there was more actually than there is. But I mean, I think there's enough to tell the story, which is important, and illustrate the essential truths of what we're doing. But boy, I sure wish there was more.
Oh. Hi. Do you know how long? I know the Chinese Exclusion Act was one thing. When they talked about those other two acts against them, like I know most of them came here to San Francisco for the gold rush. But how long do you think they lasted in the Napa Valley area? And I'm only curious about that because I didn't even know about Chinatown and Napa Valley, and I've got family not in Napa but in NorCal wine country up that way.
Right. Well, we have census records, luckily, that do tell something. Now, of course, even the census today doesn't count, you know, underrepresented minorities very well, and so we have to be really suspicious. But really, what we see is by 1900, we're down to, you know, hundreds, and by 1910, it's like dozens. So they were pretty much out of Napa by then. I think for Connie's reason, for both that they went back to, a lot of them, when their useful working lives ended, they went back to China, or Chinatown's probably in the urban areas because it was, you know, not as much strenuous manual work, but they just did not stay because I think the population shrank at that time, and so you need to be with your community in those probably in the Chinatowns, but we don't really know that many details, unfortunately.
Well, when the 1880s and 1890s was a period the Chinese were under siege, and there was the Chinese were driven out of Chinatowns, and their Chinatowns burned from Tacoma, Seattle, Eureka, Truckee. All these places had the deliberate arson fires and driving out of Chinese, including San Jose's Chinatown. And there was an apology by the city council 5 years ago for all the injustices toward the Chinese in their city, including the arson fire that destroyed the whole Market Street Chinatown, one of the largest in California. Now, this did not happen in Santa Clara, in Napa Valley or Sonoma Valley. So there was something there that kept the community from any violent expulsion. And look at when you hear about the Chinatown that survived, despite the fact that the lease was taken over by somebody else, and the Chinese stayed and didn't pay rent. So there wasn't a violent expulsion, but somehow the Chinese managed to hold their ground, and the community, I guess, tolerated it. So it shows something, and that could be part of our good legacy.
It's on the good side, I guess, of the ledger.
Comment and question. Comment, the photos that you have is probably from Edward Mulbridge. And we do have a lot of photos here by William Hoy in the 30s, who went and took a lot of pictures. William Hoy is little known. He was before Himart Lai. Himart Lai used a lot of his material, but William Hoy died in 1949, so we don't know much about him. And on your book, I think you can include, I have to go behind the speaker. Sorry, I have to be behind the speaker. You could have included Sonoma, because I think Sonoma started all this earlier. About 20-30% of your film were about Sonoma, because Horace Page for the Page Act was a congressman for Sonoma, and later on we talk about the Gary Act. He was also from Sonoma. But Jack Ding, who was interviewed, the Buena Vista Winery, which we credit for the first winery to hire Chinese, was Sonoma. And also out of you talked about the 1878-79 the California Constitutional Convention. Out of the 152 representatives, there was only one that spoke up on behalf of the Chinese, Charles Stewart of Sonoma. And his archive is at the Sonoma Historical Society. I think there's a lot there about the Chinese in that area. So hopefully you can add Sonoma to your book.
Yeah, that's right. I think Sonoma is actually, I kind of joke that there's probably Chinese in Sonoma Valley book ready to be written. And you're exactly right. Buena Vista, where Jack Ding we filmed, was in Sonoma, and they were their earliest one. But I just grew up in Napa. That was the one that I was kind of most kind of passionate and upset about. But Sonoma, I agree. Sonoma's earlier and a little bigger, and actually has a great story to tell as well. But I will say, we were talking earlier, like, well, why is this story? And I will say this story has captured imagination like none of us, I think, could have imagined. I think it's because Napa Valley is uniquely kind of famous, internationally, and nobody thinks about the Chinese presence and the contributions, and it's a juxtaposition that it actually sparks a little interest that I think has really kind of helped interest in the book and getting this word out there. And we were kind of joking because. Obviously sitting here in the Chinese Historical Society of America, many of the things that we saw, we discussed there, the Chinese, the Exclusion Act, and so on. Many of you have probably heard before in different scenarios. Most of the audiences that Jeff and I talked to have never heard of this. All of it's brand new, and so I think it's really helped kind of educate people. They may just come in for the Napa Valley part, and then they get educated on the Chinese part. So it's actually kind of nice. It's been, I think, a good educational excuse people are learning when they didn't intend to about that kind of stuff.
My name is Arlene Chu. I live in Sonoma, and I had no idea about the contribution of the Chinese until I did go to Buena Vista for wine tasting, and they have cutouts of the history, and I thought that was really interesting. So I have a question. I had friends who were not able to make it, and also, or do you plan on being at the Sebastiani Theater too? Are you going to be streaming any of this online, or?
Yeah. So different things are happening. We are we were accepted. Jeff was accepted, really. I will say totally credit him. We are to the Sacramento International Documentary Film Festival, and so we are going to be shown in Sacramento on the 8th or the 9th. Sorry, 8th or the 9th of August. Yeah, and so we're going to be in the Orinda Library. We're doing a showing there August 15th, and we're going to be in Sonoma in mid-September, I want to say. We're working on that. So we are trying to get around. But the plan is, we were thinking it'd be already free by now. We've had so many nice screenings, we're keeping it. But probably next year, it's just going to be available for free to anybody through the Napa County Historical Society website. So that is the goal. The goal is not, there's no money making here. It's like the whole goal is to get the word out to everybody. So we'll be available for free. But we do think it's important if we can to view it in community. That's really where you get the energy and whatever. But the whole point is to make it available to anybody who wants to see it.
Let me ask a quick question. Thank you for the great research and wonderful film. My question is first, I wonder if you get a chance to look into county records office to see if there any Chinese purchased lands, did any land transaction at all during the time?
That's a good question. I did not actually. I did not do that. And as I say, whether they could have purchased land or not, or just really, it's more like just I think the societal norms didn't allow you to sell to a Chinese person even if they could buy it. But no, I don't. I do not do that. No, that would have been a good angle.
And this will have to be our final question. I think we got one more question. Time for one more question out there.
We'll do two more.
Two more. Okay, we do two more. We'll do one here, and then the back, and then we'll have to move on to that section.
Thank you. It was fascinating, but we had 12,000 people come from Hong Kong. What about doing reverse engineering research and translating this film into Cantonese and Mandarin and then putting it back into Hong Kong and Guangdong, so that those people, there must be descendants of those original families who ultimately ended up going back. So Jeff, you're not off the hook. I think you need to do a translation.
Well, we did, there is a subtitled version in simple Chinese, and we had it done professionally because there's a lot of nuances when you translate something, especially historical records and topics such as this. So there is a subtitled version for that, but then that's an interesting way to look at it from being over there and I know your background having lived over there. So.
This is one more.
Yeah.
So since the end of these discriminatory laws in the past few decades, has there been, or is there a current presence or reputation in the wine industry by Chinese people?
Oh, like the current ownership of Chinese in the wine industry? Yes, there are some. In fact, when we were here, we spoke with who? I can never. Yes, there are a few. Yao Ming, in fact, owned a winery, or at least a wine shop in St. Helena, and there are a few. It's not a large percentage, but no, it is there. And in fact, I have several goals in this whole thing. We did mention, as you saw briefly, there was a plaque installed in Napa, overlooking their Chinatown. We were just at one 2 or 3 months ago where we installed a plaque in St. Helena, next to its Chinatown, and then we are currently working with Calistoga, and that one's been fully funded by the Calistoga Tourism Board to install one in Calistoga next to Calistoga's Chinatown. And the goal is in heritage tourism. The goal is actually to get people, hopefully from China and other places, to kind of tour around and kind of like learn, so it's kind of a win-win, right? Calistoga, they get people that wouldn't otherwise visit, but then we also educate, and then we get more people coming in, and then hopefully we will encourage more Chinese, there's there's wine drinking and contributions to the economy and owning vineyards and all sorts of stuff, right, that we can do. Because that's the way I think we do it forward, right? It has to be of interest to people, and this is part of that goal. Yeah. Great.
All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists for coming in. Let's do my hand. I want to thank all of you, the wonderful audience. Pay attention. We will have more events coming up. We have an event tentatively scheduled for August, and we'll have information coming out about that soon. Our panels will be around during our lunchtime, so feel free to come up and talk to them individually if you have individual questions. I think we're going to proceed to
So we're ready to serve lunch. The format is kind of layout buffet style. You will go out in the hallway, grab your lunch, and kind of bring your food back here. Some of our distinguished panelists will be around, so hopefully you can mingle. We want to have the flexibility, kind of spread the chairs around. We could do semicircles and kind of talk. And some of our panelists may have to leave sooner or later. But John's book, which is based on the movie, is on sale at the front desk. And he'd be glad to sign it with Connie, who has also contributed. So by all means, take advantage of our distinguished panelists, mingle. Again, I'm Willard, Program Committee. It's through Joyce Chan. Joyce, wave your hand, a former board colleague of mine. We were both on the board of directors. I came back because we love this organization. But we would love to kind of hear from you. I'll be mingling around, so let me know if you have ideas about future programming and stuff like that. So thank you for coming and enjoy the food. And again, the restrooms are downstairs.
Good to see you. Dick Jack Chan. Dick Chan, yeah. Thank you for coming.
I was right next to it. I was at
I'm Willard. So by all means, introduce yourself to our speakers.
Thank you. Well, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. I love this. I love it.
The Chinese never talked about it like this. They didn't want to talk about it. I never heard it. That's why from my father. It's all sort of working out.
Oh, did you? Oh, that's good. All right. I didn't realize he was in that family for that long. That's impressive. I know, I think they got, I'm always a little hesitant when I say that because I think they.